Afternoon and welcome to ICE webinars. Today we are joined by the IAC's Nancy Davis, Director of CT Accreditation, Darlene Humphreys, Director of MRI Accreditation, and Wesley Folds, Director of Nuclear PET Accreditation. ICE webinars would like to thank the Intercital Accreditation Commission. Since 1991, IAC has operated as a non-profit, accrediting facilities that provide vascular testing, ECG, nuclear, MRI, diagnostic CT, and intervention-based procedures under its mission of improving healthcare through accreditation. More than 14,000 IAC accredited sites have implemented standardized and optimized processes, experienced cost reductions, and most importantly, continuously improved their patient outcomes. To learn more about IAC, please visit intercital.org. Now, just a reminder to save the date for our 2026 ICE Expo, which will take place at the San Antonio Marriott River Center, San Antonio in Texas, and that will be February the 20th to the 22nd. Now, the Imaging Conference and Expo is the only conference dedicated to imaging directors, radiology administrators, radiology technologists, and imaging engineers. ICE offers valuable CE credits from the ASRT and ACI and is a unique community of key decision makers and influential imaging professionals. So for more information, please visit attendice.com. Okay, today's webinar, as usual, is eligible for one ARRT Category A CE credit by the AHRA, and you can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey, which will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 CE credit, and you'll be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@ndpublishing.com. We'll wrap up today's presentation with a live Q&A, so please submit your questions anytime using the questions feature on your dashboard. Let's kick off today's webinar by giving away one of our ICE gym bags to the attendee that can tell me the answer to the following trivia question. September is National Honey Month. Which state is known as the Beehive State? Answer now using the questions feature on your dashboard, and I'll reveal the answer at the end of the webinar. As I mentioned earlier, our presenters today are Nancy Davis, Darlene Humphreys, and Wesley Folds, and they will be discussing surviving the continuous quest for safety. So Nancy, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Linda. And like Linda said, I am Nancy Davis. I'm the Director of CT Accreditation here at the IAC. Linda gave a pretty good explanation of what the IAC is. The only thing I would add is that our mission is improving healthcare through accreditation, and our main focus is quality and safety in medical imaging. And we are one of the approved organizations, accrediting bodies to accredit for CMS to satisfy the MIPA mandate. Just a little bit of information about us. Today, there we go. Today we are going to be talking about CT, nuclear medicine, and MRI, and safety. We are going to cover for each modality a little bit of history, so the safety concerns in each modality, and then we're going to discuss some strategies to prevent safety incidents in your practice. We're hopeful that this webinar will help you communicate, or if you're a technologist, understand maybe safety and how it relates to maybe the modalities that you aren't familiar with, because a lot of times people have questions about safety, what's going on in the suite next door. So before we get too far into the topic at hand, I always like to start with a history of early X-ray. If you are in medical imaging, you most likely know who this man is and what the picture on the right represents. This is Wilhelm Röntgen, and in 1895, he did accidentally discover X-ray. Picture on the right is the very first X-ray that was taken, and that is of Mrs. Röntgen's hand. This is where medical imaging began. A little less known historical fact has to do with this image and these gentlemen. The gentleman looking through this crazy apparatus is actually Thomas Edison, and the other gentleman volunteering up his hand is Clarence Daly. And in 1895, it was actually Thomas Edison that invented the fluoroscope. Everything was going great for this team. They were very popular, traveling the country and using this technology to perform imaging on high-profile medical cases, except for in about the early 1901, something happened. Clarence Daly's hair started falling out. Now, he was a middle-aged man. It wasn't terribly alarming, but by late 1901 into 1902, his hands started swelling. Hence, he was always showing off the equipment with his hand. And in 1902, he did have necrotic tissue in his hands, and he succumbed to radiation poisoning as the reason for his death. As soon as things kind of going south for the experiment, and they realized that this might not be a safe experiment, Edison quickly got out of medical imaging and never returned. Now, that was in 1902. It actually took into the 1920s before anybody started making any kind of protective equipment for radiation workers. And this is just a photo of an early lead apron and lead gloves that were used to protect individuals from radiation exposure. From a hand X-ray in 1895, medical imaging has evolved into a wide array of imaging modalities, and each modality has its own unique quality and safety concerns. In modern day medical imaging, there is a need to standardize and regulate radiology practices to help assure both quality and safety, and this oversight does come from accrediting bodies. As I said in the beginning, I am the director of CT accreditation here at the IAC, and a big part of my role is to help set standards to protect both patients and staff during CT exams. Just a brief history of computed tomography. Obviously, it was developed out of X-ray, so we already knew the safety implications of using X-ray. So there were no big surprises in safety in the history. But if you're wondering kind of where CT came from, in the 1950s, this man he's a physicist named Alan Cormick, he developed a theory for CT imaging, mainly that you could take multiple measurements of X-ray and cross-section them and create a 2D image. He did publish his results from his first experimental CT, which was not on a human, it was on the material you see here in this photo in 1963 and 1964. But at the same time, unbeknownst to either of them, Godfrey Hounsfield was working on a similar theory, which led him to secure funding for the first CT system in late 1960s, with which he performed the first CT of a brain. Now, that brain was a cadaver brain, but he was able to, it's pretty interesting, he was able to prove by imaging that and then slicing the cadaver brain that it was an accurate representation of the anatomy. On October 1st, 1971, the very first CT was performed on a live patient with Hounsfield's unit. Each slice took 5 minutes to get. So each individual image took 5 minutes to obtain. The reconstructed images took 2 days to reconstruct. So it was like a 3-day project, and they didn't have any way of filming them. So they actually took Polaroid pictures of each slice. So the first CT was a bunch of Polaroid films. Pretty interesting. And in 1972, the Hounsfield scanner was featured at RSNA. In 1979, Cormick and Hounsfield won the Nobel Prize for their CT work. Just a side note that I find fascinating is that it was only 21 years after the Polaroid pictures of the scans were used to archive the images that PACS was featured at RSNA. PACS was featured at RSNA in Yes, 1993. I was a student, that's why I know. So just, it's interesting how quickly things escalated once they got this technology, the drive to be able to record it in a expedient and usable and shareable manner. This is a picture of a representative picture of the first CT. You can see there's a cystic structure that they did find. They were trying to confirm that this woman had some sort of tumor. Great. So after that scanner, things quickly evolved. In 1994, when I started doing CT, I did work on a single slice scanner. That was the first scanner we had. It would scan, and then the table would move, and it would scan again, and it took quite a while. Then we moved to multi-slice scanners, and which would take multiple pictures and then multiple slices, and then move and then reconstruct it. And then we moved to helical scanning. When I started working on a 2 and 4 slice scanner, I thought I was driving a Ferrari, but we all know how that escalated as well. Now we had 8, 16, 32, and now up to 640 slice scanners. The fast scanners have led the way to more applications for CT. Obviously, we couldn't do a coronary CTA on an 8 slice scanner. We didn't even successfully do too many vascular scans with contrast. But higher resolution has resolved, but so is higher dose in some cases, depending on the exam. So safety risks in CT. There's 2 main categories of safety issues in CT. One would be inappropriate or unnecessary radiation dose, and the other one comes from contrast complications. Inappropriate dose can come in the form of inappropriate modification of a protocol, either increasing the dose, making the scans smaller, the slices thinner, many different ways. Inappropriate scan planning, which would be not including all the anatomy and had to rescan, or over scanning, going past the anatomy that's pertinent for the exam. You also need to be concerned about staph exposure, and a big one is wrong patient, wrong exam. If you do the wrong CT exam on the wrong patient, then somebody's been fully exposed for no reason, for no value. Some ways to mitigate inappropriate dose and staph exposure are addressed in the IAC's patient employee safety policy. These include using staph monitoring and protective barriers, having patient holding policies, and permanent protocol changes need to be authorized by the physicist. Because when you have your protocols measured by the physicist, then they have dose parameters that they need to stay in. Other strategies for mitigating dose issues include written protocols available to technical staff so that everyone knows what the proper protocol for your facility is, so that you're getting the anatomy and the scan to the physician that he is expecting and needing, so that you don't have to bring the patient back and scan them again. Obtaining a thorough history from the patient to make sure you're doing the proper exam. Best example I always have for that is you could have an order that says CT of the chest with contrast. If you don't get a thorough history on the patient, you might not realize they had a DVT last week, and what they're really supposed to have is a PE study, which is a CT of the chest with contrast, and the doctor just didn't fully write out the order. You also want to limit to the scans, like I said, to only necessary anatomy. And the other one for more advanced imaging, especially vascular and cardiac, is proper training on contrast timing. There's 2 different methods of contrast timing. One would be a test bolus method or bolus tracking. So it's just important that your techs really understand which one works best for them, or which one you're using in your facility, and that they're really comfortable using it, so you get that proper contrast timing and the best imaging possible. The other policy that helps mitigate accidental radiation exposure is adhering to a patient identification policy. It's really important to have one, obviously, but it's also, especially as an administrator, important to observe that everyone is using it every time. Everybody is now being tasked to do more, scan faster and do more scans with less staff because of staff shortages, but this really is a very important step. Contrast complications. Contrast complications come in the form mainly contrast reactions, contrast extravasation, renal toxicity, and needle sticks to staff. Policy, a patient pretest preparation policy, a solid policy is really important. It helps you provide a thorough screening before a contrast injection, and it should include what are your parameters for renal function tests? Do you draw BUN and creatinine on every patient? Do you have an age threshold? Do you have certain medical history that indicates that you're going to do it, like certain medications or certain histories? And then getting a very thorough allergy profile to make sure the patient hasn't had a contrast reaction in the past. If they have, what are the thresholds of contrast reaction that you're willing to scan, especially in an outpatient office, and what do your pre-medication protocols look like? The other ways to mitigate contrast complications is to make sure that the IV is proper placement and gauge. This again is very important for your vascular studies and your cardiac angiography studies. It's not good to put it in an antecubital if you can all help it, because patients inevitably bend their elbow. And the gauge, you want to make sure the catheter you're using, and it depends on the catheter sometimes, but you want to look and see what those rates are, what it is rated for as far as contrast rate and pressure, PSI. You also want to make sure your staff, if whenever possible, are using self-retracting IV systems, and make sure they're using them. Make sure they're pushing that button. Sometimes it makes placing an IV a little more difficult, but it is a very good way to make sure you don't pull out that needle and stick yourself. And then also, it's great to make sure you have good placement of your sharps container. Best practice is if you have a little table that you're doing your IVs on, to have one of those little smaller sharps containers. Even though those things may drive your cost up, in the long run, avoiding needle sticks is a big cost saver. You also want to make sure you have a policy in your office for if a stick happens, especially again in outpatient, what is your policy? What is your practice? Do you ask the patient to stay? Who asks the patient if they can go for any kind of testing you're going to do? Make sure your staff knows how to wash the stick. Make sure they know where they're supposed to go for employee health. Also, medication and contrast administration and supervision policy and a medical emergency policy are very important to address contrast complications in the form of reactions, contrast reactions, or any kind of medical emergency that happens to a patient during their exam. You want to make sure your policies are very thorough on your drug box, what needs to be in there, how often do you check it. You want to have contrast reaction drills, drill it out. Get somebody to volunteer, say this is a contrast reaction, get somebody to grab the emergency equipment, to grab the box, open the box, because in an emergency, it's a very intense situation. And if you haven't done it several times, you can lose important time. Also, you want to make sure your emergency information is posted. You would hope everybody knows the address where they work, but in an intense situation, sometimes your brain freezes. So have it right there by the phone, and make sure you know who's supposed to call, who in the office is going to call, who's going to go out front and flag down the ambulance. Just make sure that all those roles are role played so everybody knows what to do. And again, like I said, you're going to want a protocol for reporting and treating needle sticks. So in summary, key strategies to improve safety in CT include following policies, make sure you have the proper equipment to keep your staff safe, and make sure you provide effective training for all incidents that may happen during contrast reactions or medical emergencies in the CT suite. And now I'm going to turn things over to Wesley Folds. He is the Director of Nuclear Medicine for the IAC. Here you go, Wesley.
Thank you, Nancy. And like Nancy said, I'm Wesley Folds. I'm the Interim Director of Accreditation for the IAC in Nuclear Medicine and PET. And I'm going to get started a little bit with just the history of radiopharmaceutical therapy. So in 1896, Henry Becquerel, pictured here, discovered natural radioactivity while studying uranium salts. He had hypothesized that uranium salts would absorb sunlight and remit it as X-rays. So his hypothesis was to wrap these photographic plates in black paper so that the sunlight could not reach them, and then place the uranium crystals, the uranium salts, on top of the wrap plates and put it out in the sun. So when he developed the plates, he saw that an outline of the crystals were being there. He also put coins or cut out metal shapes between the crystals and the photographic plates and found that the outlines of those shapes were produced on the photographic plates when he developed them. So the weather in Paris wasn't really cooperating, and he thought he could not continue to experiment without direct sunlight, so he put everything into a drawer. A few days later, he decided to develop the plates that were in the drawer, and he did not expect to see much of anything. But what he found was that even without direct sunlight, the uranium salts were emitting radiation of their own, and therefore this was the accidental discovery of natural radiation. The discovery of radioactivity by Henry Becquerel in 1896 inspired the Curies in their research and analysis of which led to the isolation of polonium and radium. Marie Curie developed methods for the separation of radium from radioactive residues in sufficient quantities that allowed for its characterization and the careful study of its properties, especially therapeutic properties. Marie Curie's pioneering work on radioactivity, along with her discovery of radium and polonium, further advanced the field, and it basically laid the foundation of radiopharmaceutical therapy. So pictured here, you see the Curies, both of them. In 1903, they won half of the Nobel Prize for Physics and shared it with Henry Becquerel. And in 1911, won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry for her work in the isolation of polonium and radium. Radium's radioactive properties provided new means to target tumors. Although the lack of the precision and the understanding of the radiation biology kind of limited its effectiveness and essentially its safety. So during the 1920s and 1930s, we had some advancements in radiotherapy, and they were marked by development of linear accelerators, which allow for higher energy radiation beams, and then the cyclotron by Ernest Lawrence in 1934. The first radiopharmaceutical used for therapy was radioactive iodine, I-131. It was primarily used to treat thyroid disorders such as hyperthyroidism and thyroid cancer. I-131 really demonstrated the feasibility and effectiveness of using radioactive substances to target specific organs. In 1941, the first patient was treated with radioactive iodine for thyroid disease. In 1946, the first thyroid cancer patient was treated with I-131. And in 1951, sodium iodide I-131 for the use with thyroid patients was the first FDA-approved radiopharmaceutical. Which brings us to 1956, and probably one of the most important developments in nuclear medicine in its existence. In 1957, Walter Tugger and Margaret Green developed the first Tech 99M generator at Brookhaven National Lab, and of course, like many things other that we've already spoken about today, on accident. They were trying to separate I-132 from its parent, but they encountered an impurity which they found to be molybdenum, which is the parent compound and decays into technetium. This prompted them to create this technetium generator. And in 1961, Brookhaven National Laboratory sent out the first order of the Tech 99 generator to Argonne Cancer Research Hospital for the use in blood flow measurements. Now, it was there that Paul Harper, he observed Tech 99's application to imaging thyroid gland and brain tumors, which sparked kind of a new wave of interest and helped Tech 99 emerge as a prominent isotope in the medical imaging due to its ideal half-life and its gamma emissions. Within 6 years of first developing and sending the first generator out, the demand became so high that they actually had to go to mass production with commercial production companies to generate. Most recently, many of you have probably heard that the emergence of radiopharmaceutical therapy and theranostics, which is the treatment and diagnosing for radiopharmaceutical therapy, has taken center stage in nuclear medicine. Because of the success of therapies such as Lutathera and Pluvicto, if any of y'all watched the Super Bowl last year, you understand that Pluvicto was one of the ones that had quite a few commercials out there. There are currently over about 250 isotopes being studied in clinical trials right now, with many showing very promising publications to treat a multitude of cancers. So what is it that frightens patients about nuclear medicine? So throughout my 20 years, or roughly 20 years in the clinical setting, I found it to mean that they are simply just scared of the unknown. And many of them see the name nuclear, or they hear the name nuclear, and they relate it to something very negative. A lot of people are like, well, am I going to blow up, or what's going to happen to me, Wes, whenever you would try to explain. And once you kind of broke down some of those barriers of being afraid, most patients, and you related it to something that they knew about or something that they had heard about more of, then they were okay. So a lot of times I would say, hey, it's somewhat essentially having a CT scan, just in a different way of gaining the image quality. So once you broke down that barrier, they were usually okay. But the word nuclear in itself was somewhat frightening. So let's talk about some of the radiation safety. The average radiation dose to a patient. So the annual background radiation dose to the general public is approximately 3 millisieverts. The average dose received from a simple X-ray is about 0.1 millisieverts. For CT, it's anywhere from 1 millisievert to up to around 10 millisieverts. And then for a nuclear cardiac stress test, which is still SPECT imaging, which is still probably the most used or the most performed nuclear medicine test out there still, is 9.3 to 11.3 millisieverts. So really not that much difference than some of the top end CT exposure levels that you're getting. So how can we limit our exposure? Basic principles, tools, techniques can be used in the nuclear medicine lab to minimize exposure to the technologist and to the patient. Time, distance, and shielding, basic. Minimize your time around the nuclear medicine suite and or its patients. Maximize your distance from your sources, and remember that the patients, once they are injected with the radioactive material, they are the source at that time. And use proper shielding. Make sure that when you're a technologist that you're using in the lab the L screen that's putting in front of it, so that you have your lead between you and the isotope and you're putting it into a new syringe, or if you're dropping it into your dose calibrator. Applying ALAR principles, as low as reasonably achievable. Let's try to make everything as low as we possibly can. And then also newer technology in the nuclear medicine lab to limit the prescribed or the administered dose. Many professional societies have really pushed to be aware of radiation exposure over the last 10 years and have suggested many alternative methods, whether it be software or imaging techniques, to limit the amount that you're actually giving the patient to begin with. So reconstruction techniques, using iterative reconstruction instead of filter back projection. CZT technology, with a couple of manufacturers having certain cameras, especially for cardiac imaging out there, that produce excellent image quality with very minimal dose being given to the patient. Sometimes only 4 to 6 millicuries, whereas it's sometimes 10 or 30 millicuries with a more of the older spec cameras that are out there. And then, of course, attenuation correction utilizing dual modality imaging with SPECT-CT or PET-CT imaging gives wonderful image quality with minimal dose being exposed to the patient. So is nuclear medicine safe? And the answer is yes. It's safe to patients, it's safe to the technologists, and it's safe to the public. Now, as long as, for instance, in therapies, you want to make sure that once you're administered a therapeutic dose, that you give good instructions to those patients so that they can minimize their exposure to other individuals out in the public. So general patient safety in a nuclear medicine or nuclear PET suite. Where do potential accidents happen? You know, there are 3 common things that I experienced, or I experienced something myself, but even witnessed whenever I was in the nuclear medicine field as a in the clinical setting, is needle sticks by the technologist. In nuclear medicine, everything we do just about has intravenous access that has to be gained. We inject almost all of our isotopes intravenously. So oftentimes I have witnessed people recapping needles, and that inevitably is going to lead to a needle stick for your technologist, but it's in an effort to minimize radiation or radioactive material spillage from the needle or anything. The last thing a nuclear medicine technologist wants to do is to clean up something he or she has leaked all over the lab at the end of the day after doing 8 to 10 patients. The catheter bag, what if it is leaking or is positioned on the imaging table and it gets caught? This actually happened to me. End of the day, last patient of the day around 4:30, and the gentleman was very difficult to get on and off the table. He gets on there. I try to position his catheter bag. He is very restless. He knocks the catheter bag loose as he's going into the table. It gets caught and it gets ripped, and radioactive urine goes all over the suite. So, you know, now we have a spill. We have to contain the spill. This gentleman was inflicted with some pain because it pulled and came out, and it was a very, very horrific experience, honestly, for myself. So the other one is patients ripping out their IV line by hanging it on something. In nuclear cardiology, you start an IV, you give an injection of the radioactive isotope, and then the patient will wait for a little bit before they come in for their imaging and their stress testing. Oftentimes, people would walk through the door with their arm having blood dripping off of it all over the waiting room, and their IV in their hand because they had hung it on something or they had ripped it out or taken it out. So those are all potential accidents that I've either witnessed or seen happen. As we spoke about, radiopharmaceutical therapy has been in the spotlight for nuclear medicine recently. This is an area where, not so much in diagnostics where we're giving too much radioactive materials or things like that, but in nuclear medicine with radiopharmaceutical therapy, we could potentially harm patients. And these are a few things, and I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'm going to touch on a few of them where the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, either had self-reported issues from a facility or they found nuclear regulatory inspection findings. So one event occurred when a patient was scheduled to receive 27.1 microcuries of Xofigo, which is used for prostate cancer. They canceled the procedure because the blood pressure was too low and returned a month later, and the patient received the dose from the original vial. So they ended up getting an underdosage of approximately 10 microcuries. So they only received 10 microcuries instead of the 27.1 because it had already decayed. Another patient, and this is one that I'd like to touch on a little bit more. Another event also switched radiopharmaceuticals for 2 patients receiving treatment on the same day. I don't know how familiar you are with Pluvicto and Lutathera, but they both come in the same exact vial. They are both lutetium-177 products. One is lutetium-177 dotatate. The other one's lutetium-177 PSMA. And they both are 200 millicuries as the prescribed dose. So they come in the exact same color, the exact same looking vial, and they're both lutetium products. We have seen in this instance where they were given the wrong ones. One was given Lutathera, should have gotten Pluvicto, and then vice versa. So we always encourage our facilities to take note of that and to try to store them separately if possible, if they have the capacity to do that in their hot lab. But if they do not, then definitely have some distinct methods. 2 people checking the dose prior to administration, making sure double checking it before they take it out of its package. All of these different things that you can put in line in your protocols to ensure that you're giving the patient the correct dose. One event in the treatment apparatus that the licensee normally used for lutetium-177 Pluvicto was unavailable. So the facility decided to use a different apparatus for 2 patient infusions. During the infusion, the licensee noticed that the leaks from the vials into the shielding container. So they believe the leaks were happening because the replacement apparatus actually pressurized the vials for administration, unlike the apparatus the manufacturer recommended. Again, this is following protocols and doing things that the manufacturer recommends. The dose led to an underdose of 2 patients, one with 60 and 64% of the prescribed dose actually being received. So quality of care is not being given this properly. And now you have radiation exposure and a radiation spill or radioactive spill that you've got to contain and clean up and allow to decay. 3 events were associated with inadequate equipment setup. It led to patients receiving less than 80% of the prescribed dose due to a leakage, and no setup issues were noted in those reports. Another one with lutetium-177 administration, the patient felt their hand was being wet, and then the facility discovered a leak at the connection between the syringe pump and the patient's IV site. This event resulted in the patient only receiving about 70 to 75% of the prescribed dose. And then underdose medical events were associated by lack of adherence to protocols and procedures. So 2 events were associated with an inadequate volume of saline used for the flush tubing. This event led to patients receiving 69 and 39% of their prescribed doses. So it's these events in particular that were associated with a simple lack of adherence to a facility protocol that really are somewhere where we can make sure that we're giving good quality and safe care. The effective, concise protocols based upon published guidelines and standards, as well as specific and intense training and teamwork, can help eliminate some of these failures. So it is a teamwork, and it is about training. It's a team concept. Physicians, certified nuclear medicine technologists, nursing staff, medical physicists, your radiation safety officer are all part of your team. They need to have ongoing training, ensuring radiation safety training for nursing staff assisting in those therapy or diagnostic procedures, updating your protocols minimally, at least annually, and looking at them, especially as new things are coming about, and then training for new radiopharmaceuticals and emerging imaging procedures and the therapies. These are 4 areas where patient quality care and safety can be ensured. Making sure policies and oversight is thorough and complete by the radiation safety officer, making sure equipment is functioning properly by the health physicist, or that shielding is proper for the imaging or therapy being performed at the facility by the medical physicist, making sure that there is standardization and adherence to protocols, making sure that the training, competency, and the evaluation of those is being performed, and then lastly, quality improvement. Radiation safety officer is essentially responsible for the complete oversight of the radiation safety program. They ensure that written directives and other required documentation is maintained. They ensure compliance with the RAM license for specific diagnostic and therapeutic administrations. They ensure proper QC and calibration of all equipment. And then lastly, they review any patient dosimetry programs if they are applicable for your facility if you're performing radiopharmaceutical therapy. Standardization of policies and protocols, radiation safety and radioactive materials handling protocols. They need to be in place and they need to be concise and appropriate for each individual of your team. General safety protocol policies and protocols, equipment and instrumentation, specific protocols for each diagnostic or therapy being performed, And then radiation precautions or instructions that need to be given specifically to patients following their testing or treatment as they go out into the public. Protocol for patient follow-up that includes identification and or treatment of any complications that may occur during and post-testing or therapy administration. It is important that individuals on the team are trained properly for the task and role they are playing in the department. And for example, are your nurses getting proper training in radiation safety with clear understanding of the isotopes they're working with or around, or the therapy that they're helping in the administration of? Are they correctly getting instructed on proper handling of those radioactive materials in the event that, say, the technologist is not around, and who they should contact in the event there is a radioactive spill to minimize exposure and to make it more a safe environment? When it comes to personnel training for radiopharmaceutical therapy, especially, some considerations as to what the physician's training should come to mind. Are they getting the continuing education as the new therapies are coming out? Are they listed as an authorized user for the specific therapies they are performing? And do they have specific training documented for the therapies they are performing? Lastly, I wanted to touch on quality improvement. QI is defined as the framework to systemically improve care. Performing self-assessments on your facility to identify potential areas where your processes can improve is essential to quality care and safety. Making sure standardization of those protocols and the performance of diagnostic and especially therapeutic testing and administration are in place and that they are being followed. And then basically all of that comes down to this is an effort to achieve predictable results with an improvement in efficiency, effectiveness, and essentially safe patient-centered care. These are my references. Thank you for your time. And now I would like to give it over to Darlene Humphreys. Darlene is our Director of Accreditation for our MRI division. Darlene?
Thank you, Wesley. Good afternoon, everyone. As Wesley said, my name is Darlene Humphreys. I am the Director of Accreditation in MRI at IAC, and I'm going to speak with you today for a few minutes about MRI safety. In the beginning, MRI was developed over decades of time by dozens of notable scientists, two of which received Nobel Prizes. The first commercial low field system appeared in the early 1980s and had a field strength of approximately 0.5 Tesla. This was rapidly followed by the evolution of the 1.5 and 3 Tesla magnets. Technology in this field has developed at lightning speed until we now have a large assortment of MRI scanners, different magnet strengths, different configurations, high field, low field, middle field, upright, extremity, full bore, open bore, on and on. So with so many scanner configurations and field strength, how is safety impacted, and what can you do to maintain MRI safety? So now we have this exciting technology touted to provide quicker, more precise diagnoses without harming the patient. So where did it all go wrong? In 2001, a 6-year-old boy named Michael Colombini was having a post-surgical MRI scan. An anesthesiologist was with Michael and noticed that the piped-in oxygen wasn't working. The technologist left the area to find out what was going wrong with the oxygen. Things got worse, and the anesthesiologist called out, "I need oxygen in here." A nurse who was passing by heard the command, picked up a nearby oxygen tank, and rushed into the MRI suite. The tank was grabbed by the MRI's magnetic forces, pulled into the bore of the magnet, striking Michael in the head and killing him. The subsequent investigation uncovered clear safety issues. No MRI safety training was provided for the technologists. No MRI safety training was provided for any other staff at the facility. The MRI technologists left the MRI suite unprotected, And there was a ferromagnetic oxygen tank located directly across the hall from the MRI suite. In addition to the discovered safety issues, it was found that 2 other projectile incidents had occurred in the months prior before the death of Michael Colombini. That same MRI technologist had taken a ferromagnetic wheelchair into the MRI suite, and another anesthesiologist had brought in ferromagnetic oxygen tanks into the MRI suite. Neither of these incidents were reported to hospital administration, state, or federal officials. So did we learn anything from that incident? Well, apparently not. We all know that MRI accidents are grossly underreported, likely due to litigation concerns or fear of damage to the facility's reputation. Even so, if you are watching the news, MRI accidents seem to be on the rise. And the accidents that are reported have been catastrophic to patients, staff, and equipment. So we're going to take a look at some of the catastrophic MRI accidents in the MRIs Gone Bad section. A companion not screened or prepared. This is the most recent accident. I'm sure most of you have heard about it. It occurred in Long Island, New York. A man wearing a 20-pound weightlifting chain entered into the MRI suite to assist his wife, who was getting up off of the table. The magnetic fields pulled him forcefully into the scanner by the chain that was around his neck, where he was stuck for approximately 60 minutes. He was taken to the hospital in critical condition, where he did die from his injuries. Unauthorized entry. This is what happens when a patient's spouse brought a wheelchair into the MRI suite. Uneducated staff. A nurse sustained crushing injuries that required surgery when she pulled this bed into the MRI suite. Somehow the patient fell out of the bed, but amazingly was not injured. The patient lied and wasn't put in a gown. This patient was appropriately screened before she entered the MRI suite. She denied having any metal objects on her person right before her hidden gun went off and shot her in the buttock. The companion lied. This man was a companion to the patient and was screened by the technologist. However, he did not disclose that he had a gun in his waistband. As he entered the MRI suite, it was pulled out, the gun discharged, and the bullet struck him in the abdomen, and he died later from his injuries. Technologist error. A patient who was a resident of a local prison suffered injuries when a technologist allowed them to enter into the MRI suite with waist shackles on. The patient became attached to the scanner by the waist, and she started to scream that she was being cut in half. The technologist then asked the policeman to go in and pull her off. He also became attached to the scanner from his gun and equipment in his belt. Inadequate screening. Over a dozen documented deaths and non-fatal but serious injuries, such as hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy from cardiac arrest, have been reported in pacemaker patients inadvertently subjected to MRI scanning. The actual worldwide number of these events is unknown, but it is estimated to be much higher. Device failure. Broken leads in any implanted device, such as a pacemaker, neurostimulator, or implantable cardiac defibrillator, can cause electrocution sensations, pain, and even burns to the patient. Incorrect positioning. Forming a loop with the patient's anatomy, such as crossing the arms or legs, or having the thumb touch the thigh, as shown in the picture, can create a closed circuit where burns can develop. Another area that you might not consider that a loop can close is under a woman with heavy breasts. So be sure that a larger woman, you may want to put a towel under her breasts to prevent that loop from closing. Are you frightened yet? Well, you should be. The MRI scanner has the unique distinction of having the ability to kill someone. The MRI technologist is the last line of defense for the safety of your patients. And these aren't the only concerns of the MRI technologist and patient. It's just the tip of the iceberg. A plethora of other things can ruin your day or your career. Tattoos, cosmetic enhancement, including some eyelashes, prior surgeries, recent biopsies, claustrophobia, sedation, contrast reactions, and the list goes on. So moving forward, with so much responsibility and so much variability with the scanners going on, how do we protect our patients from the dangers of the MRI scanner? It all falls back to the basics. Careful and multiple screenings with the patients and companions, diligent preparation of the patient, research and documentation of all implants, restriction of access of any unnecessary people, a full stop before the patient enters the MRI suite, and frequent MRI safety training for all staff. Screening. Be careful, as we know, patients do lie. Multiple screening must take place, not only with the patient, but anyone who goes near the magnet. If someone isn't screened, they must stay in the primary waiting room and hopefully out of earshot of the patient. Preparation of the patient. Start with a good history. Confirmation that you have the correct person. Changing the patient completely, regardless of the exam, and securing the patient's belongings. And make sure the patient has a chance to use the restroom, and that will save time in the long run. Now take a look at the model in this picture. It appears he's wearing a simple white cotton shirt. No problem, right? Wrong. This shirt is infused with copper, causing the potential for burns. So no matter what the exam, all garments, including undergarments, must be removed. These patients should only wear garments that you provide to him or her. To provide a more comforting patient experience, consider investing in some cotton pants or shorts and robes along with your gown. Make sure they're completely MRI safe. Research all implants. You have to research every implant carefully while keeping in mind the strength of your magnet. For off-label implants, for your scanner strength, appropriate standard of care is to consult with the physician who is responsible for your MRI safety. And there are some great resources online, such as mrisafety.com, that can help you with that. Be sure you document all information regarding implants. Remember, if you don't document it, it didn't happen. Always be sure to document the name of any person you speak with at the device manufacturer if you have to go that far to call them. Access restriction starts in the waiting room. Do not take any unnecessary people back with you to the MRI suite. Anyone and everyone who wishes to go back to the MRI suite must be screened and cleared for any metal objects on their person. Any companion must lock up their belongings. Anyone not in compliance with the regulations does not come back to the MRI suite. As the last line of defense, just before you cross the threshold of the MRI suite with a patient, a full stop should be completed. Confirm the patient's identity, confirm the exam, repeat the screening questions, ensure that the patient has properly changed and has no external metal products. Ask the patient if they have any concerns or questions. And it is imperative that each facility completes the MRI safety training on a routine basis. Every employee at the facility must complete safety training at least on the onset of hire. All personnel who enter the MRI suite must be screened when they're hired and repeat screening if there are any health changes such as implants. It's also a good idea to check with your service engineer or physicist to discuss the process of doing a quench. If your staff has to do a quench, they need to know when it's appropriate and what happens. One scanner in India, 2 people were pinned to the scanner by an oxygen tank. They tried to quench the magnet, but then they discovered that the quench button had been deactivated. So check with your service engineer just to make sure. You don't want to test the quench button by hitting it. So you need to ask them about the quench magnet, and you need to know what happens if the magnet doesn't quench. What's your next steps? Your staff also needs to know the dangers of a quench, such as explosion, vent collapse, and large amounts of helium being sprayed into the room. So consulting with your service engineer or physicist is a great place to start when you train your staff on such emergencies. And this leads into the next slide. Does your facility perform safety drills in the MRI department in the event of a fire and a quench? As Nancy had mentioned in the CAT scan discussion, in a bona fide emergency, all common sense seems to fly out of the window with people who are not prepared. Drills should be completed on a routine basis to make sure all staff knows their roles. And in the end, MRI is a rapidly changing field. It takes dedicated and supported people to want to keep up with all the changes. We make it look easy, but it's not. The challenging part is that MRI accidents are very rare. Near misses are very rare, and it's very easy to get complacent about patient safety. But if we need reminders, all we need to do is watch the news. And with that, I'm going to send it back to Nancy.
Thank you, Darlene and Wes. A lot of amazing information. Just a couple quick final thoughts, because I know that we are running short on time. The medical imaging field is rapidly changing, and the key to ensuring safety for both staff and the patients we serve is assuring policies and procedures are up to date. All staff are trained in appropriate safety matters, and this does include drills for critical situations, as we all discussed, and assuring appropriate safety equipment is available and used by all staff. The IAC website and our staff are available and happy to assist you with your quality and safety needs. We have a very robust website that has numerous resources for this information. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to our host, and we will take some questions. And we do want to thank you all for joining this webinar, and for ICE for collaborating with the IAC to bring you this information.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nancy. We've got one quick question we can do. Our facilities investigated nursing job roles and determined it is not within their scope of practice to handle or administer radiopharmaceuticals. Could facilities that permit nurses to administer radiopharmaceuticals be NRC or state regulations violation?
So for that's a great question. I would love to entertain it a little bit further if that person would take my information down and we could speak a little bit more in depth on it. But essentially, it is up to the states and the local policies and NRC regulations. But we could definitely look into it and see if we could help out in any way.
Perfect. Well, it's a
I
shame.
just
Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
I
Nancy.
just
Sorry.
that as Wes said, we want to make sure everybody realizes that all of the directors at the IAC, we have open door policies. We're very accessible. So anytime you feel you have some challenge or questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We won't even ask what facility you're from if you're nervous that we will think you're doing something wrong, but we're always here to support you with that.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nancy, Darlene, and Wesley, for your time today and for such a great informative presentation. And also thank you to the IAC. So please visit intersocietal.org for more information. As promised, the answer to today's trivia question is Utah. So congratulations to our winner, Jen Sturm in North Carolina. Now, just a quick reminder, you can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey, which will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 ARRT Category A CE credit by the HRA, and you'll be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Please visit icewebinars.live for more details of all our upcoming ICE webinars and, of course, complimentary registration. Now, if you've missed any of our past ICE webinars, including any by the IAC, please visit icewebinars.live to view our whole webinar archive. So thank you once again for your time today, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.